Hello everyone, my name is Aixin. I'm a JQI graduate, class of 2026, and a future law student. Before I head off to the university, I want to share a lesson it took me years to learn. A lesson about communication, misunderstandings, and something I now think of as translation. But before I explain, let me ask you a question. Please raise up your hands if you think you are a translator. Wow, you must be really professional, but I could only see 1 or 2 hands here. That's okay, because I wouldn't have raised my hand a few years ago either. For a long time, I thought translation was about switching between languages, like English to Chinese, Spanish to French. However, something unexpected turned that idea inside out. Over the past few years, I moved between different schools. I bet some of you had the same experience, right? At that time, I thought I was simply changing environment. But now, when I look back, it felt more like changing between different contexts. I started to realize that people used the same language, but they didn't always attach the same meaning to it. Let me give you an example. The first time I noticed this was after transferring from a private school to a public school. Back then, I was still adjusting to a very new, different environment. And many of the things that used to be normal to me suddenly weren't normal anymore. In my previous school, students were encouraged to stay active, and playing sports during the break was completely natural. So one day during a break, I picked up a volleyball and headed outside. But this time, a teacher stopped me and reminded me that study should be my priority. To be honest, that comment wasn't particularly harsh, but it caught me off guard. I was surprised, not because I was told to study, but because I realized that the same behavior could carry such different meanings. In my previous school, playing volleyball during the break represented balance between study and relaxation and a healthy school life. But now, it was seen as a distraction from academic work. Nothing about the action had changed. Only the context had. That moment stayed with me because it made me wonder how often this happens and what does this mean to us. Years later, I found myself asking a similar question in a very different setting. As a future law student, I had an internship at a law firm during the summer vacation. At that time, I was expected to be fascinated by the legal arguments. I am always interested in those complex cases and the logic behind them. I know I'm a weirdo. But what truly struck me wasn't the law itself. It was the people who walked through the door. One afternoon, a client came in asking for legal advice. But as he spoke, it was obvious that he was struggling to make things in a way that felt clear and logical. So let me show you what I heard, and this is really close to what he actually said. So now I'm the client, okay? So we had a deal, like 50-50, and that's what we said. I brought all the clients, did the work. I did all of it. And then he just left. He said there was no contract. And now I call and he even don't pick up. I don't know the legal words. I don't know how to say it right. I just know this is not right. I want my money, and I want it to be fair. And here's what I translated in my head. Breach of an oral agreement and unjust enrichment. Plaintiff seeks restitution and damages. It's hard to understand, right? Yeah, that is law, and that would be my life in the future. Don't pity me. Yeah, that is the language of law. Precise, logical, and complicated. But as I stared at the sentence, I realized something uncomfortable. That is, I wasn't really listening to him. I was so focused on translating his story into legal languages that I almost missed the one sentence he kept returning to. I just want justice. That's when it hit me. The same situation, but we were coming at it from two totally different angles. I realized that law is a language. It has its own words, cultures, and rules, but it doesn't understand how ordinary people talk. People stay silent not because they have nothing to say. They stay silent because the law cannot hear their language. If no one translates, many of the voices cannot make it into the room. And that put me in a difficult spot because I was learning to speak legally, but I had forgotten how to listen to people humanly. And that reminded me of standing at the classroom door with the volleyball. I thought I was doing something natural, but others don't think so. Now the roles were reversed. I almost failed to understand someone else, and I almost failed to translate what they really meant. So after that day, I started paying attention to the conversations around me, with friends, families, and even with strangers. I noticed how often we say one thing but mean another. For example, a friend said, "I'm fine," when their voice is heavy. A parent told their kids, "Go wherever you want," but hopes they will stay. Familiar, huh? We don't often say what we want, and we don't often hear what they really wanted to say. So now, I elevated my way of communication. Every time when someone talked to me, I'd pause and ask myself, what are they really trying to say? I have to say that I cannot always be right. Sometimes I'm misunderstood, but sometimes, just because of that new change, that small habit, I definitely became a better listener and communicator. Before, I thought misunderstandings just came from people not being careful enough with their words, but now I think it differently. The more people I meet, the more I realize that misunderstandings doesn't start with words. It starts earlier, with the invisible backgrounds that we all carried inside us. Different schools, different families, and different cultures. When we say something, that sentence has already been shaped by all of that. And when someone else hears it, it gets shaped up by all of theirs. And that whole process looks a lot like translation, right? And this is not only true in law. A doctor listens to symptoms, but also to the fears the patient doesn't say out loud. A teacher hears an answer, but also to the confusions behind it. An engineer might be building something, but first have to understand the requirement from someone else's perspective. Looking back, do you still believe translation is mostly about language anymore? Now, I believe translation is mostly about taking the differences between different contexts and background into consideration, even before we start to talk. So, in a way, we are all translators. We do it every day without even noticing it. And what really matters is that we think twice before believing we already understood everything. So, let me ask you again. Who here considers themselves a translator? Please raise up your hands. Wow, I definitely see a lot more hands raising here. Thank you. And that would be a huge success to my TED Talk today. So, next time, when you talk to someone, try to understand not just what they say, but what they really wanted to explain. I am Ai Xin, and I'm still on my way. Thank you for listening.